Welcome to Fortress of Faith with Tom Wallace. Strengthening the saints against Islam's assault on North America.
Thank you for joining us here today at Fortress of Faith. This is Tom Wallace. Folks, I want to talk to you about racism today. The reason why is because we have such a division in our country over these race issues. And I want to share some thoughts about it. I wished that we could be a nation that behaved and followed after the biblical model. If we did, we would not be a divided people over race. Galatians chapter 3, verse 28 tells us, "There is neither Jew nor Greek, there is neither bond nor free, there is neither male nor female, for ye are all one in Christ Jesus." Let me remind you, my friends, we are all part of the human race, God's children. However, throughout history, America has been dogged and plagued over the issues of racism. Now, it wasn't called racism in the 1700s. The term racism wasn't coined until 1902 by Lieutenant Richard Pratt. However, the division of peoples by class, by gender, by nationality, by religion, has been a problem that we have dealt with for many, many centuries. And it has dogged the human condition for many civilizations. Many have wrestled with this. Colonial Americans, when they were first coming here, they subjugated the Native American, the Indians. Then there was the black slavery going on. Let me add, though, that first that the slaves that were sent to us, that were brought to us, were first captured by Muslims in the interior and brought to the coast and sold and sent overseas. So please always know that Islam had its first hand in the slavery. However, it wasn't right for the colonials to be involved in that slavery. But it wasn't until they themselves felt enslaved by King George that they wished to be free of tyranny, that they began to address some of these issues. Thomas Jefferson, a slave owner himself, penned the words in the Declaration of Independence, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal," even though, while he did that, he owned men as slaves. And so it was a bit of a hypocrisy, and it wasn't properly dealt with by our colonial leaders. We have tried to address this issue through the years. Most of the time we get closer to what is right, but many times we still keep getting it wrong. However, the Declaration of Independence, where we said that all men are created equal, that one we got right. And it set us on a course that began to do away with slavery in this nation. The sad thing, though, it wasn't until the colonials themselves could see what enslavement was like when they themselves were the recipients of oppression. However, the colonials could not transfer their enlightenment upon the Indians and the slaves that they were oppressing themselves. In the Constitution, we can see that they didn't get it. They looked at the slave as not a full person. There was debate over, do we count slaves as people and give them representation in Congress? Many felt that that shouldn't happen. Some thought, though, well, I don't want you to count them as property for taxation, so we want you to see them as people, not as property. So there was a compromise. And in our Constitution, the black man, the slave, was given 3/5 of humanity, so to speak. And so it shows that even though we had a great document of law to guide this country, that part they didn't get right. And because they did not get that right, it led this nation to a civil war. And what we should have learned is this, is that it matters not, there's no consequence to the color of man's skin, whether it is white or black. The blood that both spilt was red. My friends, again, we are part of the human race. We're part of God's creation here, and it's not about race. However, as awful as the Civil War was to our nation, it did produce some good things. During the Reconstruction, amendments were added to the Constitution, the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment. The 13th Amendment abolished slavery. The 14th Amendment provided citizenship for them. And the 15th Amendment gave the black man the right to vote in this nation. However, it did not fix the division. Racism was still with us. Jim Crow laws were being practiced in the South, and segregation created more oppression upon the black man in our country. And finally, there was a leader who stood up, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., a man that I admire greatly. And I want to quote to you part of his speech that he gave from the Lincoln Memorial in our nation's capital, August 28th, 1963, before I was born. He stood and said, "I have a dream that my 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character." My friends, that's what I thought and I understood the civil rights movement was all about. Moving back to America after living overseas as a child and coming back to America, I found out that that's not quite what the civil rights movement had developed in our nation. However, in that same speech that Dr. King had given that day, he ended his speech by quoting Thomas Jefferson in the Declaration of Independence, and I'll quote it. He says, "I have a dream that one day this nation will rise up and live out the true meaning of its creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal." Oh, my friends, I hope for that same dream. I, too, have that dream. What was the result of the civil rights movement? Well, America was moved, and we made efforts to change, to correct our errors. New laws were put on the books. Segregation laws were abolished. Anti-discrimination laws were adopted, and affirmative action was enacted. However, I believe that some of these results was an overcorrection. Let me explain. I remember back many years ago when I was in college, I was driving down to Florida, and I was on I-75, and I saw a car veer off the side, and maybe the driver was falling asleep, and when he heard the change, I guess somehow woke up and tried to correct his mistake, but instead of correcting, he overcorrected, and he turned his car back in the path of the oncoming traffic, and he was hit by a semi and split that car in two. I'll never forget it. My friends, I believe that we have overcorrected with some of our laws. Instead of making laws that truly treats all men as equal, these laws give favoritism to some and not to all. Now, I will concede there was a time where America needed such laws as affirmative action. It was beneficial. It was needed to, in a sense, create a equal playing field. However, those laws today do not create an equal playing field. Instead, it creates inequality. And we have to stop pretending that our laws offer equality and that all men are equal. We also must realize this, that not everyone is equal in talent, but everyone should be equal in opportunity. Everyone should have the equality to go further. And I tell you what, Ben Carson is a tremendous example to show that people can climb out of their circumstances, out of their culture, and make something of themselves if they'll make the effort. The opportunities are there. There's nothing to discriminate against them to have the dream, just as it would for a white man or a black man or whatever nationality that they come from. And we must admit that our anti-discrimination laws are discriminating by their very nature. They have to be done away with if we're truly going to overcome these problems of division that's in our country. And let me say this, and let's say it clearly. All lives matter. All lives matter. We need to end racism now. We need to put an end to it and stop this. Racism is alive and strong in our country today. However, it's coming from two other sources, two new sources. America's not quite dealt with it from these two angles. One group is from the black man, those who say that black lives matter. You know, it is purely racism. They demand that we agree and agree only that black lives matter, and it's not acceptable to them or tolerable for us to add all lives matter. Folks, it was wrong for racism to be on the foot of the white man. It's equally wrong for racism to be on the foot of the black man. The other group, the other new player that we're seeing in our country today, we're seeing this come from a religion, a so-called religion named Islam. Islam has a doctrine. Muhammad made it clear that he was commanded by Allah to fight all who would not accept him as God's prophet and who would not yield to his God. And he gave the commandment to the faithful Muslim to follow through and fight those who would not accept Allah as their God and Muhammad as Allah's prophet. And so those who are carrying that out are demanding that we yield to their doctrine, to their way. Folks, that is equally as wrong as the racism that's going on in our country. And folks, exactly what's coming out of Islam today is very similar to what came out in the 40s with Hitler, when he commanded the subjugation and the killing of all others so that he could establish power for the Aryan race. The funny thing about all this is that it's really not the issue of race. It really doesn't have anything to do with a person's skin color, whether they're poor or whether they're a criminal. I could show you white people that are just as poor as black or just involved in crime. It has nothing to do with their skin color, but it has more to do with their culture. And our problem is that we have a culture that is a culture of us and them, a divided culture. And it's time that we put an end to this divided culture. We must stand for equality. And I'm calling upon people to join me in saying that we must end all racism now. Join me in agreement with Dr. King as he said that one day this nation will rise up and live out the true meaning of its creed. We hold all these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. We must stand and be resolved to respect one another, no matter what their color is. This does not mean we condone everything and tolerate all things, but we will not prejudice our minds against one another based on their skin color or their nationality. Instead, we stand for a united America, not a divided America, not a hyphenated America that is African American, Mexican American, or something American. No, it needs to be a united America. And again, remember, we are all part of God's creation. We're all part of His human race. This is Tom Wallace.